Hey everyone, welcome to today's edition of One Single Story. It is Monday, and we are in the book of Zechariah, and we're closing in on the end of the Old Testament. So I guess 2 more weeks, this week and next week, and we'll be finished up with the Old Testament. So the theme of Zechariah is deliverance. So Zechariah is a collection of prophecies, visions, and messages that are they're from God, delivered through the prophet Zechariah, who is exhorting the returnees to rebuild both the temple and the nation of Judah. So several of these right here along in that same time frame are very, very similar. We would have done Haggai last week, which is encouraging them to rebuild the temple, challenging them about living in nice houses and not, taking care of the temple. So it's a very similar theme. But the main theme is deliverance, and it reminds readers that God is fully capable of delivering his people from their struggles, and that he will faithfully stand by to fulfill his promises. From Zechariah's visions of a restored Jerusalem to his pronouncements of God's wrath against Israel's enemies, the book inspires hope and confidence in the present and in the future, and assurance in God's ultimate triumph over evil. So today we're going to tackle this and have a conversation about chapter 7. So that's where we're going to be today. And I want to focus on, I guess, a verse. It says, I think around verse 8 or so, 9. It says, "Judge fairly and show mercy and kindness to one another. Do not oppress widows, orphans, foreigners, and the poor, and do not scheme against each other." So this concept of oppression is, well, I want to differentiate between the concept of oppression and the use of the word oppression. And I want to talk about oppression today. So oppression is a word that I hear people use more than should be. Often with the word persecution. So that you will often hear those two kind of go together, oppression, persecution. And he's specifically speaking here about some specific groups of people, widows, orphans, foreigners, and the poor, which would lead me to ask, so this is how my mind works. So is it okay to oppress other people? Like that is kind of how my mind works, so we can't oppress these people, but can we oppress other people? Even though I think the simple answer is no, right? Okay.
Should be.
Yeah.
Never mind.
What I want to dive into today and try to spend some time on is, what does the word oppression mean? What do you consider to be oppression? Because everybody, and I think it's okay to correlate oppression and persecution because they tend to get used a lot together. And I hear people use the word persecution, and I go, yeah, probably not, Yeah. And I hear people use the word oppression, and I'm like, yeah, probably not, even though I think there are clearly some examples we could give. So tell me, from your perspective, what do you consider, and it's a personal question, what do you consider to be oppression?
I would think that any time that, especially a group of people, are being targeted and being denied some of our basic God-given rights, or somebody's holding a major power over you, not allowing you to have certain things that every human being should be able to have, whether it's freedom or food or being forced into something that you shouldn't have to do. That's kind of how I picture it right off the bat.
I don't necessarily think that persecution and oppression have to go together. I think that persecution is when you're treated horribly because of a belief or something else that you have. Whereas oppression, I think, is a more serious thing that is more systematic. And I went reading and I was like, you know what? Like, I have this idea of oppression, like, but what kind of do other people say about it? And so I ended up the website for the National Museum of African American History and Culture. And there's one paragraph that I think has some good answers and things that I didn't necessarily think about. It says a person of the non-dominant group can experience oppression in the form of limitations, disadvantages, or disapproval. They may even suffer abuse from individuals, institutions, or cultural practices. Oppression refers to the combination of prejudice and institutional power that creates a system that regularly and severely discriminates against some groups and benefits other groups. I think that and benefits other groups is kind of a key part of oppression, that people are using them. It's not just that they aren't getting maybe what they deserve and that they're not allowed to do X, Y, or Z. It's that it's benefiting another group as well, that they're taking advantage of them.
Is it intentional or unintentional? So I don't disagree that persecution and oppression have to go together. And if you ask me to describe them, I would have, in a simple form, I would have said persecution is more active, oppression is more passive. You use the word systematic. So systematic is, in my opinion, passive. Okay. So, when you create systems so that you don't have to think about it. So you don't have to actively manage something all the time. So we create systems here at the church. We're getting ready to implement another system that will be a step, for people to take, and it'll be systematic. That's what we're trying to keep, but it's much more passive. It's not like we're going to constantly, manage it. The goal is, okay, this becomes this funnel. And so if I was describing the difference between oppression and persecution, in the context of slavery, I would say much of what has happened since slavery became outlawed would qualify as oppression, whereas slave times would have been much more persecution, because there were active mistreatments, and for the most part, they were beatings and murders, and they were actively harming them. But it creates systems that oppress people or keep people down. And so the reason I ask, is it conscious or unconscious, active or inactive, is because I think there are things that happen that you don't even recognize, that you become a part of something, but you don't even see how it is affecting other people. It could be the way you were raised. Okay, so I could see this, the most micro organism that you can see this in my opinion, is a family relationship. So based on somebody's raising, if you came from a patriarchy or a matriarchy, would have some balance of power, how that plays out in a home, and whether you allow certain things, to happen, that you might not even consciously think about. So this would be a simple thing. If you grew up in a home where the father was extremely dominant, or the man was extremely dominant, and the mother never worked outside of the home, and there were certain roles that she played, for example, you walk into that, okay, and it might not be that you think, okay, I'm going to oppress this person. It is just you grew up in this, and this is your expectation, right? So there are racism. You're not born racist, right? A kid doesn't come out of the womb with natural thoughts of, because and the reason I know this is because I see kids in environments where they are raised with other kids of color and they don't think anything about it. And then I've seen other kids where they're raised without kids of color, like they just aren't around them, and then they go to school and they're like, oh, you're different, because that's all it takes, right? It's just you're different. So I guess I'm curious to what your belief is. Are there people that participate in oppression that are ignorant of the fact?
I guess I sit there and think about like when we went through the Holocaust Museum and looking back at what Hitler did and the Nazis. They targeted a group of people, but they didn't, I don't think, if I remember right, they didn't persecute them immediately. They began to target them, set up all kinds of propaganda to basically shift the mentality of the culture to despise these people, so that when they started to funnel them into places where they could send them off to camps, it was culturally acceptable, where had they just gone and persecuted them right away, there might have been pushback from people. So I think sometimes when that oppression, it could be persecution that runs into oppression, or it could be a very intentional and active goal that leads to oppression, and then the culture has been shifted or brainwashed or whatever, and you grow up in those generations like you were talking about, and because they think that's how it's supposed to be, because of what somebody taught them, oppression continues. And sometimes unintentionally, people just are ignorant to it after a couple generations.
I do think some of it is unintentional, but I think at some point in most people's life, they will hit people who say, hey, why are you treating this person this way because of X, Y, or Z? And if they are, so yes, they can be raised in that, but I think there are, especially in today's world, there's enough challenges to that where they will choose to continue that.
Or choose to ignore it.
Choose to ignore that they need to change.
Yeah, or that it is a problem.
Right.
Yeah. So I'm a long way from perfect. So I don't even want to pretend like, I figured it all out. But at my age now, I can look back on my life and see certain patterns or belief systems or expectations that I had that contributed to what oppression is a very strong word, but certainly created more complicated situations, and I see it different, Now there are some other things, and most of my changing has come because I have allowed myself to be in some environments that people are different. They see things different. I try not to read rabbit hole material, so I'm not always reading the same people who are feeding me the same junk. And of course, we live in a world today where that is like, we find somebody who tells us what we want to know, and we read the books that, we want to read. And, I've been challenged enough to, change some of my thought process. There's some things I still don't see quite the same way that everybody else does, or maybe I shouldn't say everybody else, or there wouldn't be a problem, because if I was the only one, it wouldn't be an issue. But, there are places, and, it specifically, I think of the four, so it mentions four here, of the four, three are easy for me, and I believe are easy for almost everybody else. Which one is the most difficult?
For you?
No, I think in general, I think in general would be, yeah.
I'm going to let Chris answer this question.
Are we going with Judge Fairley?
No, so he lists four types of people: widows, orphans, foreigners, and poor. Which one do you think is the most difficult for the average person?
I would guess foreigners, because they're not directly related to you, and you would put the other people that are a part of your community first as far as treating them well.
Mm-hmm.
That would be my guess generally.
What would you say?
I don't think I struggle with any one of them, though.
If I had to guess what you are thinking, I would think the poor, in the fact of a little bit of like, pull yourself up from your bootstraps, like, because I mean, widows and orphans, it's easy to see the people that have had family things that have caused them pain. Foreigners, going on mission trips, you get to see, and going to other cultures, you get to see how they're different, and you can accept that. But it's the people that you maybe feel like they haven't worked hard in their life. Which one of us is right?
Foreigners.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, like, now, if you'd asked me 20 years ago about the poor thing, I might would have given you a different answer.
Right, and that's not my answer. That's just what I'm just thinking.
Poverty is systemic.
Right.
And it's not just I have come to the conclusion it's not just because you won't work.
Right.
I had a dad that worked my dad would be 80 at his next birthday, and he's back pastoring again. So I don't have a not working example, so that, but if I had 3 generations ahead of me that didn't have a job and were poverty, I see poverty different today. I think in a modern culture right now, foreigner is the greatest threat and the hardest one for the church to respond properly to. Because it's an election issue, right? It becomes an election issue. Immigration, they're pouring over the borders, and we describe them as rapists and murderers, and the truth is there are some of those coming, right? There is.
There's also some of those who
that are
born
here.
and raised
That's right,
here.
exactly.
Yeah.
And that's exactly the truth. And so I think that is. I'm not brave enough to say I don't have a problem with any of these, because I still think there are places in my life that the Lord hasn't fully dealt with. And I would say, if we were all honest, everybody watching, there are places in your life that the Lord hasn't fully dealt with. You're going to have places where you contribute to that. And
generally, I don't have issues with foreigners. I look at everybody about the same. But legally, I do have a problem with coming into the country illegally. If you do things properly, which makes it very hard and challenging, and I realize there's people in great desperation that can't wait for that because of the oppression and the persecution that they have around them, whether it has to do with their beliefs or just cartel or something like that. I get the fleeing part. It's the legal part that I struggle with.
God, please don't let this turn into a political podcast. But I'm gonna make my case here, okay? Not because I'm in favor or opposed to. So let's go to the poor. Are there people that take advantage of our social programs? The answer is yes.
Yeah.
Okay. How do you fix that? The fix is to help no one, right? That's the only fix. If you don't want to be taken advantage of, you just help nobody. But that is a terrible answer.
Yeah.
Okay? That's a terrible answer. So in order to help the many, you have to be abused by the few. Are there people that take advantage of asylum? The answer is yes.
Mm-hmm.
Are they criminals, murderers? Yes. Here's how you fix it. Don't let any of them in. Is that right? The answer to that is also no. And so are there people from time to time that take advantage of me and my generosity? Yes. But I have to answer for me and not for them. Now, then, you follow what I'm saying? I got to answer for me. The only way to keep from being taken advantage of is to help no one. And that's just my observation of it. I think we say, oh, we're being good stewards of God's money, or these people are taking advantage of it. The answer is yes. That's 100% true. I'm not. if you try to make me believe that there are people taking advantage of social programs or asylum, the answer 100% is true. But the only way to fix it is to help nobody. And that's not the call.
Well,
That's not the call.
Well, the challenge is that you a lot of times have to make like some sort of a blanket decision because of the complication of it. But if things, which in a perfect world, if we handled everything by case scenario, whether it had to do with immigration or if it had to do with people asking for money or if it had to do with, in divorces, where do the kids go to the parents? If they actually carry these things out case by case, it would probably be a little bit more balanced, but there'd be all these people crying out that you're persecuting me or something like that. Like, well, if you go by case and this person's wanting to come in the country, but they're an active criminal, I mean, you should justify yourself by saying no. But we'd have to employ probably 10 million people.
Yeah, well, this is an extra long podcast already, but my theory is if people fulfilled their biblical responsibility, those things would be unnecessary. Mm-hmm. The problem is we want to pass it off and let somebody else do it and then complain because they don't do it the way we would have done it. Well, then do it. Yeah. Take people into your home. Leave some money for other people. That's the biblical way. Mm-hmm. If we take care of one another, then we're not expecting somebody else to. But anyway.
And have you ever had a meal with someone who was here illegally? You ever met folks who have?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Back in Indiana.
Yeah. And you still are thinking that is, after conversations with maybe hearing their story, that is. I'm just curious. I mean.
No, I
want to say no. Or something I want to say here.
No, I'm not. I mean, like if I'm sitting there having dinner with them and I know they're in the country illegally, I'm not going to go and turn them over to the authorities.
No, I don't think you're going to do that.
They're not going to do anything anyway.
I still do.
They're not going to do anything.
Yeah, probably not. No, but no. I mean, I've known large groups of people that have come through, and I encounter them and stuff, and I know that they're there illegally, or at least some of them are. I treat them with compassion. I talk with them and treat them like any other person, but the concept of coming over is what bothers me, if you're doing it illegally. But I understand my compassionate side goes out to them trying to seek out a better life, or at least a safer life.
So many things I want to say here. I will tell you an interesting statistic that I read. So we called them migrants for a reason. We had migrant workers. Mm-hmm. You're familiar with that term. Mm-hmm. And what that meant is during the harvest season, they migrated to the United States. And then they migrated back to Mexico. This doesn't seem like it would be true, but it is true. The stronger our borders have gotten, the less the migration back. So it was like the numbers used to be of let's say 1 million came in a season. 700,000 of them went back because they could easily come and go. Mm-hmm. The harder it came to go back, what would happen is if 1 million came, 30% would go back. Mm-hmm. And so the migration has reversed. It hasn't stopped the numbers coming. It's just stopped the numbers going back because they risk being caught both directions. Mm-hmm. And that seems like a dichotomy. Like it doesn't seem to make sense. You would think that, okay, we're having less. We haven't slowed down the flow, the influx. We've just stopped the outflow. Mm-hmm.
Eventually we'll stop those Canadians from coming over. Right?
Hey.
Well, thank you for joining us on this extra long edition of One Single Story. We hope you'll be back tomorrow for another great controversial topic from the book of Zechariah.
Can't wait to see the comments on this one.